Hi, it's Mark Owen from Moose Marketing NPR, the editor of Punchline magazine, and welcome to Punchline Talks, the big interview. Today I'm joined by Greg Pilley. He's the MD and part owner and major shareholder of Stroud Brewery, based in Stroud. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Mark. Nice to be here.
Really lovely to see you again. Thanks ever so much for joining us today. Goodness gracious, Stroud Brewery, it just seems to be going from strength to strength.
Well, I'm pleased we're still here. We've had a rocky, hard couple of years, but things seem to be easing up now. Our pub customers are selling beer again, and we're pleased that all our old customers are back on board. So yeah, feeling much more positive now.
So how long has the big company been going, and what's the turnover, please, and how many people work there?
Sure. So we established now 16 years ago in 2006. We've grown very steadily. We've just moved into this new building just over 2.5 years ago, and we now have approximately 100 people on our payroll. However, about 13, 14 of them are permanent staff. The rest are casual staff that work on our bar and kitchen. And interestingly, out of that number, about 50% of them are under 24. We have a lot of first-time employees working here, and that's really great to see that succession of people through the business. And we now turn over approximately 2 million a year. And I should say that we are quite a high turnover, low margin, high overhead business. And that basically represents our break-even turnover for our business. So we're hoping to get away and improve on that.
Now, have you always been in brewing yourself?
No, I trained as an ecologist. I actually graduated with a marine biology degree from Swansea. And then I went into conservation work in the UK. So I had a fairly rural upbringing. I grew up around several farms. I used to go grain carting and helping with the harvest around lots of local farms. And on graduation, I actually ended up working in conservation with English nature, doing chalk grassland surveys around Berkshire and Oxfordshire. I did a stint as a VSO, working in Nigeria, looking after a project supporting nature conservation in a national park in the north of Nigeria. I traveled a great deal. And on return to the UK, I actually found myself working with the Soil Association in Bristol, who you might know as the organisation that certifies organic food and promotes sustainable farming. And I specifically was working in their local food team. And that's a time when local food really wasn't a thing. This was in the late 90s and early 2000s. And the local food team was really looking at promoting things like farmers markets and box schemes, and was quite proactive doing or working with county authorities to develop local food strategies and looking at local procurement for public services, that kind of thing. My task was working with community groups and community-based food organisations. And it wasn't until I moved to Stroud through that project that I suddenly conceived of running my own business. That business, tied up my interest in community, my interest in agriculture and how we affect the local landscape. And of course, underneath all of that, producing a great product that I enjoy seeing other people enjoying too. And that is, of course, making great beer.
So what year do you have this moment of madness, and how did you kind of get to this stage? Because you don't just suddenly think, oh, I'm going to make a beer. So you must have, I don't know, did you make it in your garage or something beforehand?
Yeah, so I had long been an avid home brewer. University was an introduction. I wanted to make cheap booze that was drinkable. That was the challenge. And actually, when I was paying off the university debt on a farm, I lived in a little cottage, which was great for parties. And that's when I started doing full mash brews. And by full mash, I mean, starting from barley and the basic ingredients. And the quality of the beer really took a leap up. But then for the next 10 years, I spent traveling and working overseas. So it wasn't until I moved back to Stroud, I had a bit more time and actually set up a little home brewery in my shed. And on the days when I was looking after my kids, young kids, I would try and sneak in a home brew during the day as well. And then it got to the point where I was just producing far more than I could drink or my friends could drink. And whilst weeding on a volunteer day on a local community farm with a fellow beer enthusiast, we sort of said, wouldn't it be great if Stroud had its own brewery again? And that was sort of the moment I was possessed. And that was in 2004. And then 2 years later, we established the brewery. And those 2 years was really about finding the time, the finance, and the premises to make, a business possible.
So how did you do that? How did you find the time and the finances to make it available?
I started doing freelance work. So I actually left the Soil Association and I managed to get some funding to do some freelance work. And the work at that time was looking at farmland trusts. So one of the things that we were recognizing, it's actually very difficult to get into farming as a first-time farmer. The cost of buying and the mortgage for a farm cannot be repaid by farming activity. And so the opportunities to get into farming are reducing. Sort of succession within farms and older farmers coming out of farming, youngsters weren't really going into farming or couldn't afford to pay and split the farm between siblings, and often farms lost. And also at that time, a lot of county farms. So there was a lot of county farms that were public assets specifically for enabling new entrants, and those assets were being actively sold off. So all the opportunities to get to farming were being lost. So I was working on a project that looked at how land could be taken off the market and held in perpetuity for farming. And of course, we see great examples of that. Organizations like the National Trust do exactly that and hold large tracts of land and properties in perpetuity for our public benefit. So it's along those same lines. Anyway, that work enabled, paid a little better, it was more flexible, and that really created the time that enabled me to explore starting a business. Actually, I didn't really have enough time because my second daughter arrived around then, and that also added to family tension and time requirements, but there was just enough to think about business. In terms of a premises, I scoured the local valleys, and Stroud, as you know, is blessed with lots of industrial estates. And I was fortunate to come across a small unit and a landlord who was amenable enough for me to knock it about, put an extra door in and make it workable for a little brewery. And then finance, I based on some experience I had, I actually did my first little informal crowdfunder. So that was in 2005. And basically it was a bunch of mates who were willing to support me, but I agreed to pay them a little interest and promised to give them their money back. And I raised £13,000 in that way. And actually through one of those meetings, one of them said, well, tell you what, if I give you £10,000, which if things go badly wrong, you wouldn't have to worry about paying me back, but I want 25% of your business. And I didn't hesitate. It was, very small scale. That was a significant amount of money for me. It was risk-free. And not only that, it came along with a very knowledgeable businessman who has coached and supported me to this very day, with the only wish not to have dividends, but just to see the business grow and succeed and the value of those shares also increase.
Well, I've got to ask, who was it?
It was a guy called Adam Starkey, who is a director of Gourmet, a very successful business in the county.
I do know Adam, actually, and he's a futurologist now?
Yes, absolutely. And we meet almost monthly, and along with my current directors, and I have a great support from my directors. But Adam has always been there from the start and has been, a great source of help.
Yeah, nice guy too. You're right, a very successful entrepreneur. So going back to that, so you got your £10,000 and invested. So did you, who was your first customer?
My very first customer was our local pub, literally across the road, a pub called the Wagon and Horses. he had our first barrels of beer. And then it was quite, in those days, it was a hard sell getting into pubs. You know, pubs were still buying national brands. They were, small microbreweries didn't have a great reputation at that time. There was a few pioneers, Yuli being one of them, who was making great beer. It still makes great beer, but it was a really hard sell. So I would brew the beer one day, I'd pick up the phone the next day and try and sell some beer, and then deliver it around the county all over the place, just my few barrels. But the wagon horses, literally, I could roll the barrels across the road. And it was nice to be able to enjoy that beer and get that immediate feedback from a well-seasoned landlord who actually loved it and the opportunity to sell something quite different. The other thing that happened was, before I started brewing, I was actually approached by Gloucestershire CAMRA, the Campaign for Real Ales, and asked if I would enter my beers into their annual competition. But this was before I even had a brewery in my shed or in the unit, so I had to turn them down. But as it happened, I had done a brew and somebody had dropped out or couldn't supply the beer, and I had my first brew. In fact, they wanted it in bigger barrels, so I combined a barrel of my first brew and a barrel of my second brew of budding into one large barrel, submitted it to the competition, and we won Champion Beer of Gloucestershire in that year with our first and second brew of budding. And again, that gave me the confidence to ring those pubs and say, well, actually, the beer isn't that bad, give it a go. And we did start making some sales.
Yeah, I mean, with that accolade behind you, that must have helped enormously, to be recognised by CAMRA at that particular moment.
Yeah, it was certainly great for my ego in my in the early days, to be able to do that and just have the confidence that the beer was of that quality and standard to meet the market.
So how did you roll it out from there? So you got your first pub, wagons and horses, and how did you then move it on from there? Do you just carry on picking the pubs up around Stroud, or or just go further afield?
It really was that. It was telephone sales. That's how we do most of our work. And before I started the business, I did a bit of market research, which basically went along the lines of, if I can produce a beer that's of good enough standard to sell, would you sell it? And most pubs said, yes, of course, we would sell it. But when it comes to it, that's a different matter. The conversation usually went, I'm ready to sell you some beer. And they go, great, we're fine for now, ring me next week. And you ring next week, they go, oh, yeah, so you said you were going to call. I'm fine for now, I've just ordered my beer, call me next week. So I say, well, what time should I call you? When do you order? Well, I usually do it first thing in the morning. So you call back, oh, fine, just now. And then eventually, oh, well, I've said that so many times, we'll give you a go. And you get the beer in. And then you follow up, how was that beer? It was great, fantastic, but I'm fine for now. And gradually, those beers are taken on as guest beers. And we are fortunate that, local pubs really wanted to support and champion a small local business. And things really moved and changed in 2008, 2009, which is when we saw our first of the sort of most recent recessions. And that's when sort of the economy took a bit of a turn. People were more sensitized to local business, local economy, and wanted to support local business. And I think provenance and locality also just took a greater interest with the public. And simultaneously, so pubs were really struggling during that recession. People weren't eating out as much, but one of the things that really did work for them was local real ales. And we saw our sales double over the course of sort of 2009. So despite losing a few pubs early on, actually a lot of those pubs came back, sold more beer, and we found ourselves in quite a good place at the end of 2009.
Did they make a good margin on the beer as well? Obviously, everyone's got to make a profit.
Yeah, I think they do. And again, small, yes, I think
because there's competition, isn't it? So I suppose you can put on what you can sell it for.
At that time, I would say there was less competition. However, there were the large multinationals, and that beer was reliable. The delivery was routine. There was a lot of things to make it sort of easy for pubs to buy from those regular suppliers. To buy from a small brewery was a bit out of their comfort zone, so it wasn't as frictionless. I think in terms of the margins, I think they were probably quite similar, actually. It's just that the interest was growing in small local ales. I don't really know the margins that large breweries were making. Certainly, a small brewery has quite high overheads in comparison with a large multinational who can dilute them through scale. On the other hand, small breweries have less duty to pay. So in 2002, following quite a deal of lobbying by CAMRA and the Society of Independent Brewers, in that year, Gordon Brown introduced a duty break. So breweries producing less than 50,000 litres a year only have to pay 50% duty. Prior to that time, you couldn't really service the capital required to build a little brewery. And so what that enabled was small breweries to actually invest and repay the capital that it needed to set up. So that was the reason for that policy change. And again, when we came to 2006 to 9, with the changes in public buying, that enabled lots more little breweries to start up. So in 2006, when I started, there were 6 breweries in Gloucestershire. That year, 6 more started, so it doubled in the year of our establishment. Now there's in excess or around 48 breweries in Gloucestershire alone. And we see that nationally as well. When I started, there's about 700 breweries in the UK. Now we boast in excess of 2,500 breweries across the UK. And I would have said that 2019 was probably the best year to be a beer drinker in modern times, just because of that diversity of beer and choice. And what I really, I quite often cite that simple policy change, which has enabled that flourishing of little breweries, but also, and giving that choice, but also supported the domestic market, So in terms of resilience, you've got built up quite a microeconomy around business, pubs and breweries in quite a different way than those large breweries can achieve. And those large breweries are often, owned by big shareholders and exporting that wealth away from that locality, which little breweries don't. So I thought that was quite a brilliant piece of policy change, and interesting to see what other things can be done to have such a big impact.
Now, have you got 48 other sort of competitors here in the county? Do you guys get on okay, or is it quite cutthroat trying to get into the pubs, or does it make it a bit like Gloucester Quays when they put all the, walk-in shops together or sports shops together? They kind of works better if you're all together. Is that the case in brewing as well? The more there are?
It's not straightforward. It's quite a complex answer to that, because of course, we do get on. We're all very passionate about our business and our product, and share that passion. And we all like to talk about beer and bring the beer and the styles and the love of hospitality and what beer does and plays in that. However, the market is finite. So the amount of beer that's drunk in the UK has actually dropped, and it continues to drop. And in fact, the amount of alcohol we drink is also continuing to drop. So that flourishing of little breweries over the last 10 years or so has been at the expense of the large multinational breweries. We've actually won a slice of the cake, or an increasing part of that cake. However, in recent years, these large breweries have recognized that they don't need to produce boring beer. They're very capable of producing great tasty beer, and the prices have sort of increased accordingly, because not all beers are equal and people are willing to pay for a great product. And in sort of response, a lot of large breweries have even been buying out craft or beer, breweries with a craft identity to add to their portfolio and their brands. And as an example, if you'd gone to London, let's say 5 years ago, and had a pint of beer, probably 80% of the beers you'd drink in London were from independent breweries. Move on to today, probably 20% of the beer that you drink in London is now from independent breweries. And that's because a lot of those independents have been bought out by larger breweries, most notable of which is Fuller's, which of course we would associate as our London brewery, is now being bought out by Asahi, which is a Japanese firm. Interestingly, they only sold the brewery and not their pub estate, which Fuller's has maintained. So it's interesting that that brewing beer doesn't really have the profits to make and the margins, whereas hospitality under normal circumstances can reliably produce a profit, and even more reliably is property, and a property estate will maintain its value under uncertain conditions. So owning property is probably the most reliable way of holding on to our cash.
Now you're very big on the environment and champion that. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what makes you different to other breweries? You've just launched the free beers that I was down there with Hugh Whittingstall, Hugh Fernley Whittingstall, sorry. Can you explain a little bit about that, please, Greg?
Sure. Well, I've already mentioned that my background was as an ecologist and a marine biologist. I worked in conservation over those years, and also the importance of trying to reconnect community and where our food comes from, and that's reflected in the sort of basis and the values of our business from the get-go. Initially, starting, ensuring that our malt was locally sourced, and we were fortunate to source our barley malt from Warminster Maltings, obviously in Wiltshire, from the town of Warminster. A small traditional maltings, one of only two now left in the country where they malt the barley on the floor, and there's quite a lot of handwork involved. So quite a low carbon impact. It's young people fed on a good breakfast, dragging it around. And that business is owned by a grain merchant whose principal business is sourcing that grain from farms. And if the quality is good, pays the premium for malting barley, and the best of it goes into the little craft maltings. Hence, they control supply from farm to small breweries like ours. And we have an agreement that the majority of our malt comes from the Cotswolds, and indeed probably from within about 15 miles radius, and largely from around Cirencester, which has a lot of barley farms. In 2008, 2009, I mentioned that recession. That's when we started looking to diversify our sales. That's when we started bottling beers, and we took the opportunity to differentiate our bottles by brewing organic beers. Again, I had that interest from the start, except pubs weren't willing to pay the premium that it requires for the additional cost of those materials, whereas we could differentiate in small pack. As time went on, actually, we decided it was quite difficult to be saying, well, organic has all these benefits of biodiversity and lack of runoff and all the things that might bring. But we still brew these other beers. So we decided to completely dedicate ourselves to organic production. And that was now just a little over 5 years ago. And we still struggle to command the premiums that we might need in a pub. It's still quite price sensitive. We're still at the high end of the market, so we do charge a bit of a premium, but it doesn't really completely add up. So I think we're operating at reduced margins compared with a lot of our competitors, but we felt that was the right thing to do. And I know that if we were to use non-organic conventional malt, we would probably be saving in order of about £40,000 to £50,000 a year, which over recent times, of course, would have been, the difference between, well, we still probably wouldn't have made money, but we would have made less losses over the last couple of years. But we feel that cost is justified. And really, I mean, it's quite a complex story, but, there is a cost to buying not organic foods, but those costs usually come externally. There's the cost of clearing fertilizer out of waterways, or the loss of biodiversity. The most notable is the effect of certain insecticides on bees, and our bee population has dramatically declined. There's no denying that, and the principal reason is agricultural pesticides. It's quite clear cut. And if you're not applying those things, then you don't have that impact. So that's the right thing to do. Similarly, when we moved into our building recently, we've tried to again look at our environmental impact. We catch rainwater off our roof to flush our toilets, so we save potentially 200,000 litres of water a year in that way by capturing rainwater. One of the biggest energy uses in the brewery is cooling beer during brewing or through the process. And our chillers can capture that heat, and we can use it to heat up water to put back into our process. And again, on our scale, the investment required to put in that sort of technology is quite high on our scale. So the return on investments aren't as good as a large industrial scale brewery. But again, it is the right thing to do in the long term. That will be the right will have an impact. This year, working with a landlord, they're looking to invest PV solar on our roof, and again, we'll be able to use that energy in the building. And it's not just the sort of carbon and those things. It's also about trying to do the right thing socially. So, we're a living wage employer, which means that we pay what is recognised as the amount of pay required to exist in the UK, and that's based on a cost of living index and published annually by the Living Wage Foundation. And we, again, look internally to the sort of things that we can do to make working here good. Even finance. So I mentioned my first crowdfunder. Well, actually, we've had several crowdfunders since, but most recently we raised £300,000 together with Triodos Bank. We launched a community bond, and 50% of those loans came through local people, Stroud people, and the other 50% from ethical investors all over the UK. So again, we didn't go through a traditional bank loan, we tried to go through an ethical bank. I sort of reached a point where, we're looking to grow our business, we're trying to have an influence beyond Stroud, and I wanted to communicate some of those good things that we're doing, and sort a way to measure, what level of impact and how well we were doing, and then communicate it simply. And that's, we landed on B Corp or B Corporation as a way of doing that. And we certified as a B Corp in 2018. And just to explain B Corp, it is an accreditation in the same way that an organic certification might be. But what they measure is our environmental and social impact in a very holistic way. And it can be, it's really quite detailed to looking at the proportion of local supply. So I can tell you that 75% of our suppliers, and indeed 75% of our sales, are all within 50 miles radius of the brewery. So that's one of the sort of metrics that they might look at. Similarly, they might want to know if we have a sort of code of conduct with suppliers. Do we check on our suppliers, and do they behave in a responsible way? Do they engage in practices that might not be particularly good? I suppose the most significant thing to say about B Corp, a prerequisite, is that we actually change the articles of association of our business to put social and environmental impact on an equal level and platform as profit. And against that, we have to produce an annual impact report just to show what we're doing.
Wow, absolutely amazing. And I've got to ask you then, so through this journey that you've been through, what would you say was your biggest mistake you made?
Oh, can I admit to a mistake? I don't know that.
You might not have made any.
No, I think it's more that you don't recognize them as mistakes, but a continuous learning experience. So I've probably made numerous mistakes. I think, I could always prioritize my time in different ways. There's probably business decisions that I could make which would be far better for the business. On the other hand, I find it difficult to differentiate that from the identity of the business. So what actually makes this business is probably some of those decisions that I've made. For example, BrewDog started in exactly the same year as we did, and they took a completely different trajectory. based on some very different decisions and values. Of course, they've been an incredibly successful business, but they had a different approach to it. So yes, I think it's difficult to say. I think managing time is always difficult for a small business owner. And
it's tough, isn't it? We all have to put a lot of hours in.
We do.
You know, we all got to work extremely hard to make it work for everybody. You know, for the people you employ, for yourself, for your suppliers. It's hard graft. It's never been hard. You know, been so hard. Was there a lesson you learned from COVID at all that you've managed to move forward?
I think certainly one of the most heartening things that came out of that was just knowing the level of support that we have from our local community and our local customers. You know, they all did what they could at that time, and we did another crowdfunder during COVID to raise some immediate cash. It was sort of a sell forward, and within 2 weeks we'd raised £114,000, largely through forward selling goods and services. But again, it was a real testament to, you know, that the support we had from local people, and that's just really encouraging, knowing that we've got that baseline of business, and now things that have come back to almost normal. We've seen those customers come back, both, you know, individual customers and our pubs.
I think there's a sense of pride out there actually in Stroud and the Stroud Valleys as well, that you know, that you're there, that you've created this very fine brewery. We're kind of running out of time, Greg, so I'm going to ask you really, what's your top 3 business tips, please?
Well, the first one I think I've already hinted at is around time, and I think if you're...
Sorry, Greg, I'm just going to stop you a second. Hold on. Sorry about that, Greg. Someone popped in the door. Anyway, so what are your top 3 business tips, please, sir?
Well, for me and our business, I think in growing a little business, my first sort of appreciation really was being able to empower others and relinquish some responsibility and control. So you can't grow a business on your own. You need to start bringing other people in and give them the opportunity to do that in their own way and as best as they can. And so over the years, I you know, found that is very much part of my role, and something that I really enjoy is enabling others to sort of be involved in the business. And I think that's probably the biggest satisfaction for me now, is having an enterprise that does have a life of its own, with people that are engaged, share that responsibility, and are genuinely passionate about what we're trying to achieve.
So that was one.
That was one. So I think following on from that, I think in order to have good people, you have to hire well. So I think a critical point in a business is actually recruiting and selecting the right people for your place. I can't say that I'm an expert at that, but again, over the years, we're slowly learning how to really get the right people for our workplace, that not only that have the skills, but really about the aptitude and, you know, that fit into our ethos and what it is we're trying to do. So I think that'd be my second one, is to hire well. To find a third, I was struggling a little bit, but you know, we do live in a competitive world. 48 breweries in the county, 2,500, all doing amazing things, all producing absolutely marvelous beers. You know, real innovation in the industry. You know, always striving to break the boundaries, and you can get quite tied up in that as well. So, you know, something that we've learned is, well, actually, just head down and do what you do well, and do it, you know, to the best of your ability, and always be questioning how can you do your own business better.
Greg, I've got to ask you one last question before we go. If you turn on your car or put a CD in there, what sort of music are you listening to, or what's the last CD that you bought or download?
Well, I've traveled quite a lot and I love world music. I'm quite fortunate that we get asked back to WOMAD each year to do a volunteer shift on the Real Ale Bar in exchange for a weekend at WOMAD, which is a wonderful festival, and great that it's so local. So my music taste is usually some sort of world music or fusion, and I particularly love sort of jazz fusion. So I might put on, let's say, a South African jazz CD or a bit of world music around the world. And of course, I love a bit of ska or reggae or something upbeat that, especially in the car, that makes the journey a bit more jolly.
Greg Pilley, thanks ever so much for joining Punchline Talks today. Always great to see you. Thanks very much.
Bye. Cheers. Bye.